Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. Today I'm coming at you to do my movie review of the brand new, most recent Quentin Tarantino movie by the name of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, before I start the review, I will say that I do think that currently and for the last several years and stuff, decade or whatever, give or take, that Quentin Tarantino, in my opinion, is probably one of the best working directors in Hollywood these days. I generally, even if I don't really like the movie, you can't really argue that every movie of his, even if it might not be that great, like a lot of his recent ones, definitely has a style and a flair that towers above the majority of movies that come out these days. I will say before I start the review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that for me his last movie that I really liked was Death Proof. I thought that was absolutely fantastic and probably his shortest movie, or maybe I don't know how it compares to Reservoir Dogs, but when I saw that I'm like, it'd just be nice if he could make shorter movies more often rather than taking more years and coming at us more years in between us, or in between, and coming at us with these long 160-minute movies, in which oftentimes, as I'll say when I get into the review, it doesn't really, in my opinion, a lot of them don't need to be that long. Death Proof was really great because it just really didn't take itself seriously, and it was one of his shorter movies, and for me that was the last Tarantino movie that I thought was like really cool. Inglourious Basterds. I mean, I don't really like the subject matter of that. And then it was kind of a bummer to me when he did two westerns in a row. Was kind of like, eh. I mean, that was kind of a bummer. Although I do like Hateful Eight more than Django, just because of the atmosphere and the environment and stuff like that. Is really moody and stuff. And well, I guess just now I can get into my review of his most recent movie. It's kind of rare that I see a new movie so often, or so recently after it came out. I mean, I'm reviewing it before it's even a week old, which is really rare. It's really rare. And, this was probably, if not the movie of the summer that I was most excited or interested about. It's one of them, definitely. Probably the movie that I was most interested in / excited about. And I gotta tell you, having seen it, it's just like, oh man, And I will say that when it started, it was really great. And of course, just like, so many of the Tarantino movies that, either take place around this era, or, well, it's funny because like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are like contemporary at the time movies, and same with like Death Proof, but they still always have like the 70s music, so it doesn't even have to take place in that era for a Tarantino movie to have that music. So just like with movies like what's it called? Oh, I didn't even mention Jackie Brown. So just like with movies like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Death Proof and stuff, this movie has an absolutely phenomenal, kind of soundtrack, retro soundtrack. And, I'll just, basically say the things that are great about the movie before I really start trashing it. And obviously cinematography, camera usage and stuff is top notch. And, the technical aspects of this movie, and don't let me forget to mention production design and just the cars and just all of the, there's like an old Taco Bell that gets lit up and all kinds of old signage and stuff. I mean, the era of, like, it takes place in 1969 if memory serves me correctly, and that the year was captured so perfectly with the music and the fashions and the automobiles and the buildings and all this kind of stuff. Absolutely fantastic. And in my opinion, it's a shame because those aspects, the technical aspects and the design aspects, are the strongest things about this movie. And then unfortunately, in my opinion, you've got this really great technical stuff and all this great design stuff, and then you've got what I would regard a pretty weak set of characters and a weak scenario to go into this lavishly made, technically brilliant production. It's kind of a shame. Obviously, I mean, if you don't know, this movie's stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. And Leonardo DiCaprio is this has-been kind of aging star who's, on his decline or whatever. Brad Pitt's a stuntman slash chauffeur, since DiCaprio character is a drunk. I mean, he drives them all around, and because he gets in car accidents and stuff if he drives. So he's this has-been. So the movie, I don't even think like the first, the majority of the movie, I think it only takes place over like a course of a couple days, or maybe even, a couple days or whatever. And we're just introduced to, at the beginning of the movie, I'm not going to do a beat by beat by any means, but I'll simply say that at the beginning of the movie, you've got this scene with Al Pacino's in it very briefly at the beginning and stuff, and I think I don't know what he is. Al Pacino's a big movie guy or whatever, and he kind of has a meeting with the DiCaprio character, and he says, being a guest stars on all these, episodic, TV shows and getting your ass kicked isn't really, it's kind of sending a message to your, the viewers or your fan base, to, just see your face smashed in every week by, playing a different character, by a different, a different show or whatever. It's kind of not the image you want to be portraying now, especially with, when you're at the, point in your career that you are or whatever. He's trying to talk him into, going to, I don't know if, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if Pacino is the one. Regardless of who's offering him the spaghetti westerns deal, he's trying to talk him into going to Italy, and someone wants him in spaghetti westerns there, and he's not sure if he wants to do it. And at the time the movie starts, I don't know if this movie, I think it's a movie, this western movie. That's another thing I didn't like about this movie. Tarantino having done his last two movies being westerns, and then you've got a very heavy western element in this movie. It's just like, Jesus Christ, when are you going to get the western shit out of your, you'd think with doing two western movies back to back, that would have been out of your system by now. Hopefully it's freaking out of your system for good. I hope his last movie isn't a western, I'll tell you that right now. Remake of, Hang 'em High or something, but, so the majority of the movie, is him about, like, he's in this movie. I don't know if he's got this bit part or something like that, a cameo part or something in some western movie, and, during the course of the beginning of the movie, this movie, we see DiCaprio, learning his lines and stuff like that, and, being at this kind of, on the downward spiral of his career or whatever. He's obviously a drunk, and he's, and really anxious about, getting the lines correct and stuff like that. Another thing I want to say is I generally don't like movies about movies, I don't really like music. You know how like there's certain bands and stuff that are big music fans and stuff, and they'll make music about music. I don't really like music about music, nor do I really like movies that are about movies per se, like that Billy Wilder movie. I don't know if it's Hollywood Boulevard or whatever it's called. I really don't like movies about movies, and it's part a movie about a movie. I mean, that's a part of it. I mean, it depends on, like Rocketeer or something. That's really not a movie. I think that was a really great movie showcasing just Hollywood without delving too much into the actual, movie making process and stuff. That was a really great way of showing Hollywood without going too deep into it. This one, it's just a personal preference. I'm not saying that it's a weak point of the movie. I'm just saying, me personally, I don't really like music about music or movies about movies, and that's, I'd say, I'd say a strong part of this movie obviously is about making movies, half of it or whatever. Because at the end of the day, I mean, like we spend half of the time kind of with, DiCaprio character, and then the other half with the Brad Pitt character, throughout most of the movie. I think the middle half is spent like throughout just this one day when DiCaprio is on the set of this western, and Brad Pitt ends up taking this hitchhiking hippie chick to the this what we'd only this old studio full of all these Charles Manson hippie chicks and stuff. And so I will say that the movie started off on a really, really great point, and a really great start or whatever, and it's just like, oh man, here we go, man. And it should be, I also want to say that it's funny because this is the only time since, I did actually see Grindhouse in the theater, so this is the first time since Grindhouse that I actually saw a Tarantino movie in the theater. All the other ones, it's mainly because they were released in December, and I don't really go go to movies in December unless it's something really, really, really important. So that's a lot of the reason why I haven't seen a Tarantino movie in the theater. Because I think all of them that came out, I don't know, I think all of them that came out since Death Proof might have been in December or something. But yeah, it was just kind of cool to see this on the big screen, and like when it started and stuff, and the music and the cinematography and the name, you know, Quentin Tarantino film or whatever. It's just like, oh man, this is going to be great. And it started really great, but by the time it got into the, you know, the middle of the movie, we find, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio on the set of this Western or whatever, and he's just, there's scenes that just, you know, and you know, this isn't uncommon for Tarantino movies. There's scenes that just go on and on and on, and I have no problem with the scene going on and on and on if there's like a payoff or some kind of reason at the end of the scene for it to go on and on and on. But that scene with the, you know, that little girl actress, or she prefers the actor, I think, or whatever the hell she says, on the set of the Western, I thought was, oh my God. You know, it was like mid part of the movie, or maybe even a little bit before the midpoint of the movie. I'm sitting here watching it, and I'm going, you know, this movie started really good, and now it's like we're watching. It felt like with that scene and some of the other scenes, like we were watching just just roll camera. I don't have anything written for today. Roll camera. We only got enough for one take at this. Roll camera. Ad lib everyone, and we'll just put it in the movie. I mean, that's what a lot of this movie actually, like the middle part of this movie, or maybe even more than that, a lot of the scenes in this movie felt like just like, you know, one take, ad lib, do whatever you want, action. And then we'll just keep rolling until the roll's gone, and that'll be the end of the scene. I mean, it just felt like that's what, you know, a lot of this movie was. I mean, it wasn't even a lot of the clever Tarantino dialogue or the clever necessarily Tarantino, you know, scenes necessarily, and I just found myself midway through, or maybe even a little, you know, bit before midway through, going, you know, like, holy shit, you know, nothing was really happening, or what is happening isn't really that interesting. And then they do another thing where they're actually filming, you know, the DiCaprio Western movie scene, and it's really weird because, you know, the way the scene starts is it's like all cut, like it's like all of a sudden we're just watching the Western movie. I mean, it's coverage, like it's the movie within the movie, and then it seems like the scene goes on and on and on, and the dialogue isn't interesting, and then it's like, and finally, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio character flubs a line, and it's like, shit, what's the line? And you know, and it's like, oh my God, we just watched like what seemed like 6 or 7 minutes of this Western scene that's not even interesting, just to get to this joke where DiCaprio's going to flub his line, and then it goes on for like 2 or 3 more minutes, and he flubs the line again, and it's just like, I will say one of the best parts in the movie is when, I think it's after this scene where he goes into his trailer and he's just, you know, pissed off at himself, like, what the, you know, fuck are you doing? You're this actor or so-and-so actor, you know, and you embarrass yourself in front of the people like that, and he's just spazzing off at himself. He's so pissed at himself. That was probably, you know, one of the best parts in the movie. Unfortunately, it's like just like, I don't know, 90 seconds out of this 160-minute movie or whatever. And then he goes back and he gets all serious, and he goes back and does this scene with this girl that he was talking to earlier, and it's just, he gets it perfect, and you know, he's getting praise from the director. And it's so funny, you know, one of the funnier scenes is from the little girl who's like, she's 8, and she's like, that's the best acting I've seen in my life, which is just a funny joke because she's 8 and not even, you know, and who knows for how many of those years she was even really conscious of acting, maybe half of those 8 years or something like that. So that was a kind of a funny line. I mean, that's what I'm saying. There's, you know, there's lines, I'd say like half of the funniness, or maybe even more than half of the funniness doesn't even really work, like the humor and stuff. And one of the other funny things that actually got some laughs in the theater, and I thought was funny, was when he's, you know, the little behind the scenes bit of him with the flamethrower, and he's just like, oh, can we do anything about the heat, you know? And he's like, the other guy's like, it's a flamethrower, you know. I mean, that was actually funny. So I mean, you know, I'd say, like I say, not even half of the humor stuff really was even humorous. Majority of the time the audience didn't really laugh very much at all about the so-called humor. But, you know, by the time it's midway point, what can I say? I mean, it's a freaking bore. And one thing I do want to mention also, that there's one of these scenes that seems to go on for 9 minutes just to prove a point about, you know, like the what's his name, Brad Pitt character, and why this one guy doesn't want him, you know, to give him a job on the set because he beat up Bruce Lee or whatever. And it's like, you know, there's this scene where he's Brad Pitt character's fixing the antenna on Leonardo DiCaprio character's house, and I think he has this flashback about why, you know, this altercation he has with Bruce Lee, and that's why, you know, and then he cuts back to him on the roof, and he's like, like you got to spend like 9 minute scene to just say, you know, why, you know, he can understand after the fact why people, you know, might not want to give him a job in this film set studios or whatever. And it's just like, I don't know, it kind of reminds you of that scene with Christopher Walken in Pulp Fiction, but that was, you know, where it's just like a long kind of monologue scene. That wasn't as long, just to explain the thing about the watch, but that was done in a way which is actually creative and fun and entertaining. Whereas, I don't know, I mean, I just feel like, you know, that Bruce Lee scene in particular, I felt like it was a huge mockery of Bruce Lee, and, you know, having the industry potentially having killed the guy, and, you know, for real, and then having him, you know, be mocked in this movie. I was just like, I had a really, I'm not a Bruce Lee fan by any stretch, but I mean, I just like, you know, in particular, if he was murdered by the film industry and now he's mocked years later in a movie, it's just like I got a really bad feeling about it, just a bad taste in my mouth about that scene. And I was just like, oh man, that's really, you know, shitty the way you know, if I was Bruce Lee's, you know, family or whatever, man, I'd just like, oh man, talk about, I'd be really kind of not happy with that scene. And there's just so many scenes that I felt either didn't need to be there or could have been cut down by half or 3/4, you know. So the movie is like 160 minutes long. I would say easily take out 30-40 minutes of this movie. It doesn't need to be that long. 2 hours I think would have been a perfectly adequate length. And then there's this other scene the same day that DiCaprio's doing his Western, where Brad Pitt character takes this hitchhiking hippie chick back to the mansion, you know, this studio. The hippies have taken over, this hippie chick, you know, whatever, cult. And it's just another scene that just goes on and on and on. And I will admit, you know, first time, I've only seen this once, but, you know, first viewing, it was suspenseful because you know, the characters are saying this and that. And Bruce Dern is in this movie. I can't believe he's still alive, because even his daughter is like 60 years old or 50. I don't know what. It's just crazy that Bruce Dern's still alive. But the scene where Brad Pitt's at the hippie ranch and they're saying, oh, this old guy who, you know, ran/owned the studio is, you know, as a viewer you think, oh, these people killed him, or these, you know, and they took over the ranch, and it's this big bit about, you know, oh, this kind of stressful scene about them giving a particular story that you think is them just lying to cover up the fact that they killed him. And then I guess this is kind of a spoiler. Then you go into, well, without spoiling it completely, I'll just say, I don't know, the scene ends in a not necessarily, it's kind of points you in one direction, and it ends in a way that you didn't expect. And I will say, without maybe spoiling it, that after that long scene of, you know, dragging things out, or, you know, keeping you in suspense, the way the scene ends is kind of a letdown. It might be clever in a certain way, but it's also a letdown also. And it's just like, then he comes back to the car and beats up this hippie guy and makes him change his tire. I mean, there's so many scenes that, like I say, either don't need to be there at all, or cut them in half, or cut 3/4 of them away. It's just like, holy crap. I don't know. And of course the big, you know, Charlie Manson kind of Sharon Tate thing is in this movie. I'm not going to spoil what ends up happening, but just like with the scene with, you know, Brad Pitt at the hippie ranch or whatever, I will say that the movie ends in a way that you don't, you know, expect, you know, when it's a movie that's being about, you know, Charles Manson, Sharon Tate, this and that. So the way the movie ends isn't like, I don't know if you know anything about the official story of that incident or whatever, the way that's presented in the history books. You know, the movie, it ends things with a twist or whatever, and I was really kind of impressed going through the movie, being an hour, maybe 90 minutes, and hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours into it. Like, Jesus, I'm kind of proud of Tarantino for not having all this gut-wrenching violence. And of course, at the end of the movie, you get your kind of gratuitous Tarantino gut-wrenching violence, or over violence, ultra violence. And it's kind of like, I don't know. It's not, is it necessary? No, not really, but whatever. The audience seemed to, enjoy the ultra violence, so there's a little bit of commentary on North American folks. But as a whole, man, I was just like, oh my gosh, let down, let's face it. So I'm afraid I'm only going to be able to go 2 stars out of 4 stars for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I mean, everything about the movie is strong except for really the scenario, I think the dialogue compared to what Tarantino has delivered in the past really isn't that amazing. The scenario certainly I don't think is anything that's very memorable at all, unlike kind of Pulp Fiction or, Reservoir Dogs. It's funny because when Reservoir Dogs, came out, I wasn't a fan of it, but as the time goes on, it's like, and I watch that more and more, it's like, especially compared to movies now and stuff, it's just like, I can see why that movie was popular. I mean, I like it more and more. So I just feel like, it's, Tarantino still has the capacity to make things look and sound amazing, but I feel like he's just losing. It's like, it doesn't really matter if stuff looks and sounds amazing if the core soul of your movie is just empty. I mean, I wouldn't call this empty, but I mean, I'd call it like half empty, or maybe half empty. I mean, it's a pretty looking and sounding movie. Another scene that was just one of those scenes that I was just like, why is it there, is, the chick who played Sharon Tate was really hot and she's fun to look at and stuff. But, there's this scene, I think it's the same day that, what's-his-name is filming the Western, and what's-his-name goes to the hippie ranch, where Sharon Tate goes out and goes to the theater and watches a movie that she was in. And I'm just like, I mean, I don't remember that scene having any kind of payoff or any reason why we're even watching Sharon Tate go to watch one of her movies, and this pathetic thing about, one please, and the woman's like 75 cents, and she's like, well, how much does it cost, or like if I'm in the movie, or what if I'm in the movie, and she ends up getting in the movie for free, like 75 cents, and you just like, you don't want to financially support your own movie, huh? And it's just like, what's that about? Like, who, and she's trying to, I guess, pretend like she's the star, trying to be a starlet or whatever. And what's so funny is no one even knows who the hell she is. And oh my God, I will say, as I said, I mean, the woman who plays Sharon Tate's hot or whatever. But again, that was just one of the many, many scenes. It's just like, why is this even in the movie? Like, Sharon Tate, oh boy, a scene of Sharon Tate going to watch herself in a movie, and I can only assume I would imagine, I haven't seen that movie, but I can only imagine that's the real Sharon Tate in the movie. Or at some point in this movie they do this goofy ass thing where they were, DiCaprio character was talking to someone about, having potentially been a potential choice for a character, and I think it was a movie, The Great Raid, or some movie I haven't seen. I think Steve McQueen ended up being in, or something like that, and they did this thing where they like insert Leonardo DiCaprio into what I presume to be actual footage of the movie, which is just kind of cool and kind of dumb at the same time. And I will say, there's this one scene at a Playboy mansion where there's like all these Hollywood stars, and like they got a guy to like play Steve McQueen, and it's funny because the guy, like, at first he like looks nothing like him, but the more you watch his face and him talk, the more you can kind of see Steve McQueen there. It was just kind of funny. So in closing, what I will say about this movie is there's a fine line, in my opinion, between a movie that's just trying to take place in an era and a movie that goes like too overboard celebrating that era. Like, I feel like this movie not only portrays that era but celebrates it in a way that's maybe a little over celebratory. But you can't blame a guy if the guy's passionate about an era or whatever. It's just I'm not saying that again, I'm not saying that this is a fault of the movie. I'm just saying my personal opinion. Where there's some period movies that, in my opinion, like Rocketeer, for example, that just capture an era in a way that just makes it feels like it was filmed then, as opposed to, and not overdoing it at all, as opposed to this movie which looks like it was filmed in that era, but at the same time they're from the future because they're just, filming all these things that if you were just living in that era, people would think are insignificant, but only because you're from the future, you're filming like this insignificant stuff like Taco Bell's lights turning on at dusk and all this kind of stuff. And there was this really cool scene, as Brad Pitt character drives home to his trailer, but he's just like going past the drive-in theater like Van Nuys or something like that. And there's so many just cool 1969 era things about this movie, but that's my problem. It's like you should, in my opinion, that having that stuff is great, but but at the same time, like, I don't know, have your characters and your story and your dialogue or whatever, your scenario or whatever, be interesting, as interesting or more interesting than your set dressing or the world you're created for them to have the story take place in. That's where I feel this movie falls short. It's like, I think I've said it a bazillion times, where the world that was created for the characters is absolutely top-notch, first-rate, stellar, but the characters themselves and possibly the scenario wasn't nearly as interesting as just the world that was created for them to inhabit. So I think that'll pretty much do it for my review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's said that Quentin Tarantino is only going to make 10 movies. This is number 9. It's kind of sad that, in my opinion, in the last 10 years he hasn't done... I mean, I'd say I like Hateful Eight more than this movie just because of the atmosphere and stuff like that. Of course, the Hollywood stuff was done well or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's a shame that, like I say, I feel like the last 4 movies of his, was it 4? I think it is. It's Inglourious and 2 westerns and this. Yeah, so the last 4 movies of his, I really didn't do a whole hell of a lot for me, and unfortunately this is another one of them. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with for his 10th movie. Please don't be a Western. That's all I got to say. Thank you very much for watching my review, and as always, we'll catch you on the next one.